It's about division. It's about disconnection.
Now this is interesting. I don't know if the microphone is picking this up, but there's some young guys, I think possibly theatre people.
Welcome to Toby's Student Expert podcast. On this platform, Toby will engage with student experts, their field of study, passions and interests. My name is Tom Holton. My field of study is drama and directing, and my expertise is directing.
Hello listeners, my name's Toby and I am the host of Student Expert Podcast. Today's episode with Tom Holton follows on from the episode with Barney. In that episode, I was talking with Barney about mantras, and we were disturbed by chanting. What that turned out to be was the perfect interruption of Tom's theatre production of Othello, and his actors were chanting the Lord's Prayer. He goes on to talk about theatre work, acting and directing, but specifically directing techniques. Please enjoy. So I suppose I'll start off with how I was kind of introduced to you, and that was when I was doing the other recording of the other guy.
Yeah.
So to briefly summarise as it relates to this interview,
Sure.
At the time we were talking about mantras.
Right, okay.
And how words would be used to symbolise something, but the mantra would be used to transcend the meaning of the words.
Yeah.
Not long after we spoke about that, we heard that, and it was a perfectly timed interruption.
Right.
You guys doing the Lord's Prayer.
Yeah.
So the Lord have mercy,
Yeah.
And I was surprised to see that that's what you started with, which is brilliant.
Yeah.
And then obviously afterwards, I came to speak to you.
Yeah.
So can you tell me about, going straight into that? Why did you come up with that, and why was it used? And is it a particular thing of how you work?
Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm just I'm a really strong believer that your theatre and whatever else you do in the sort of performance art industry should be fun sort of thing and engaging in different ways. And I love music and sounds and stuff, and dance particularly, movement. And I think that makes everything more exciting if there's something in that, especially with something like Shakespeare, with the show being Othello. It was sort of it is a lot of dialogue, so it's nice to have kind of other elements to it. And there's a lot of sort of strong themes in the play that are based around sort of religion and ritual, and sort of ritualistic interactions with people. There's the whole army kind of element as well.
Yeah.
So we actually took that from a Black Eyed Peas song, and the rhythm of it is from a Black Eyed Peas song from My Style by the Black Eyed Peas. Yeah. But it just was kind of a thing as well, that it was relevant to religion and to God as well. And I just wanted that phrase repeated at the start to kind of have a ritualistic element, and to sort of just sort of base the sort of theme of it. I think it kind of gave a sort of darker feel to the show, which is what we wanted to draw out, and that was sort of that was kind of the aim of it, really. Yeah,
it's got quite a kind of, especially the way you were dancing, the actors were dancing to it, and it was quite rhythmic and quite visceral in a way.
Yeah, it was.
And it drew you to, as you say, that particular play, like most of his plays, are very dialogue heavy.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to have that kind of that edge to it that's also very visceral, because I'm looking through Shakespeare's plays, even though they are dialogue heavy, there is that element to very visceral storylines,
Definitely.
and violence and sex and and intrigue and manipulation and stuff like that.
Definitely. Yeah, I totally agree.
So, reading the stuff about, you suggested 2 directors to look up. So we start with Mike Alfred.
Sure.
And what struck me, I didn't have the chance to kind of read him in depth, but what I got from him is that he focuses on the actors.
Yeah.
And what they bring to the piece.
Yeah, you're totally right.
How does that influence your work as a director?
Yeah. Well, I started in acting primarily, from a really young age, and when I was at university, I came to uni wanting to, sort of continue acting and be an actor, really, when I left. And it was only at university that I sort of discovered directing more and started doing that with the society, the C24 Drama Society at Kent, which is a fantastic society, and you have the opportunity with them to pitch to direct, and if you're voted in by the members, then you get to do your show. And I did 4 productions with them across my 3 years, and it was just really beneficial for me. I think coming from an acting point of view, which is kind of the same for Mike Alfred's, because he trained as an actor, that you kind of get this sort of point of view of the actor. They're embodying the work.
Can we hang on for a moment?
Yeah, no. Yeah, Mike Alfred's, training as an actor, and, I did obviously some training here as an actor, and I think you have to do it from their point of view, from the actors, because they're the ones that are embodying the work on stage, and it's really important. And I think a lot of people use actors as, well, not a lot, some people use actors as tools more than people, and it has to be human and emotional, because that's it's representing life, so... and especially with stuff like Shakespeare, because you've already got the barrier of the language, so to make it as real and human as possible is really important.
So you say about, especially with the influence from Mike Alfred's, that without the actors there are no plays.
Right, yeah.
So how does your training as an actor influence your directing? Because it sounds like it does quite heavily.
Yeah, it definitely does loads. Mike Alfred's trained at a drama school. I've never been at a drama school. I've just done training at university, and then a lot of outside acting. But I think you pick up a lot of things as you go, a lot of techniques and exercises and things that really work, And I think that you should never... The biggest influence for me, and it is something that Mike Alfred says, is that you should never stop working on something. Nothing's ever done, sort of thing. You don't get to a point when you're like, okay, this show's done, it's finished. We can now perform it. It should always be changing and always developing, sort of thing.
Okay.
Mike Alfred's written a book called Different Every Night, and that's kind of about pushing the actors to a point when they're always experimenting and they're always trying new things. And I think that is really the key with acting, is to always try and keep it fresh and real, because otherwise it just becomes repetition and then it becomes fake. Do you know what I mean? If you're just trying to replicate what you did the night before, it's not as real. So yeah. Is
there a danger though?
Yeah.
That by doing that, by taking that principle of for example, do it different every night.
Yeah.
To keep it fresh, to keep it from being stale. Is there a danger that there is a focus on that principle rather than the acting?
Right, okay,
do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I totally do know what you mean. To me, my thing is, and something that I always kind of say when I'm with people, working with people, is that is acting. Do you know what I mean? That it should be about always looking to change, not forcing change, but being open enough that you allow things to change. Because if you're in a scene with another person and you're truly listening and responding to that person, then it will never be the same, because you'll never be able to replicate it exactly every night, and for example, the scene between Othello and Desdemona when he kills her at the end, we spent a lot of time working on that, not just because it's very violent and we had to get that safely right, sort of thing, but also because it's a scene that is very high emotional kind of like intensity, and it could become very stale after a while if you just kind of kept replicating the same thing. So I encouraged them through sort of varying exercises and stuff where we did it differently every time, and we kind of found new things every time. And some nights they'd get quite, like some dress runs. I mean, it was always different because they were very good together, but, like there was a dress run, for example, when they both got very sort of aggressive towards each other, and it kind of spiraled, and then he suffocated her. And then there was other times when Desdemona particularly wouldn't be so sort of, she'd be very passive, or Othello would get very upset, and it was always changing, and that's kind of what's important, really. And I think you're right. I think like to concentrate on it too much, to think we need to force a difference is wrong. But I think there's ways that you can help people sort of change things as they go, and Mike Alfred suggests ways that you do that in rehearsal and in performance. And one thing I do, which I think was originally a Mike Alfred's thing in his dress rehearsals, but where you give an actor, before every performance I gave all the actors a private note, and in the note it said, in this run concentrate on blah blah blah, and it might be something like simple, like concentrate on the environments that you're going into, so when you go into a room, see the room, you don't just see the Eliot courtyard where we're performing, or it might be something like concentrate on your feelings towards your mother or something like that, and then it kind of, at some points in different scenes, it might sort of change what they do, and it works for some people and it doesn't for other people, and that's just like anything really, but it's interesting.
So, well, what struck me with the article I read, I think it was him that wrote it, of Mike Alfred's, that his way of directing gets people to work within the moment.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, there is that thing of changing it every night, but there could be a slight contradiction in that if the moment calls for just doing it the same way. Is it? What do you think of that?
I mean, I think with Mike Alfred's, like, you're totally right. The whole thing that his big thing is being in the moment, and I think if you are truly in the moment, then it will always be different. Do you know what I mean? It's that kind of thing that goes hand in hand, really, because it will never replicate totally. Obviously there's some things that, it's habitual, and you kind of get into the habits of doing things in certain ways, but it's about trying to break those habits. And if you're truly in a scene with someone or two people or whatever, it can change in the moment, because you'll be listening and responding to each other. A practitioner who's like sort of an acting practitioner, really, called Sanford Meisner, he does a lot of acting.
Is he a director?
He did do some directing, but he was mainly a sort of actor trainer, and he passed away quite a couple of decades ago. Sanford Meisner, and he's a fantastic guy, and there's a book, Sanford Meisner on Acting, which is an unbelievable book for me. It changed a lot of things, how I do them and stuff, and it's very much like Mike Alfred's. It's all about being in the moment with somebody, sort of thing, and not get, no one, we're all like everyone knows they're acting, like you can't pretend you're not, but just to listen to someone and respond to someone is, it changes things.
What reminds me, especially about doing it different every night or going with the moment, it brings into my mind the text of a play, particularly with something like Shakespeare or other similar texts. I mean, especially something like I don't know if you've ever seen Tamburlaine.
Oh, okay, yeah. That's
so heavily dense with, even more so than Shakespeare, which is hard to believe. It's, how does kind of keeping it in the moment and kind of keeping it alive, keeping the performance alive, how does that tie in with remembering the text, because I'm guessing it's not possible for even the best actors to remember the exact text exactly the same every night.
Yeah, true.
Especially if they're changing things up.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a big thing for people. I mean, again, to go back to Meisner, one of the ways he suggests in terms of learning text is that you learn it in a very sort of like mechanical metronome type manner, so that if you've got a line, you learn it like sort of tapping it out, you know. So if the line's like, whatever, we're going to the park, that it's like, we are going to the park, you know, it's like to a beat sort of thing. Not to a specific beat, but just to like a normal kind of mechanical type of beat, so that you never learn them in like a way that you're going to replicate that way only, you know. So you don't learn it like with a certain emphasis on park or going, you know, and you just keep repeating that, because that's just sort of stale, you know, wooden acting really. And the way that the good thing about that, and although it probably is harder really to remember the lines, because a lot of some actors like to learn lines where they have emphasis on certain words because it helps them remember it, or they have certain movements on certain words, like they know that they'll go over to the table in the scene when they talk about going to the park, you know. And it's just like, again, it becomes wooden and stale sort of thing. And it's kind of, I just think it's interesting, because you can get to the point when you know the lines so well that you don't have to think about them, and like if you really learn them, that you can just kind of spiel them off, and then you can start to do other stuff, you know.
When I was watching, obviously I don't know the text of Othello. Sure. But I could see, watching it, there were, and I can't remember who it was, but there was a couple of guys that I noticed that, possibly the Othello character, I forget his name. Yeah, Emilio. Yeah. There was a couple of times when him and someone else had tripped up on one or two words, not majorly, and no. Not that it detracted from the performance at all. No. It brings to mind a technique that I know that's used with dyslexics. Right. Okay. When they're either acting or preparing for speeches, right, or presentations, and that is, as you said, that like when you go through the text, you go to different parts of the room and you remember different things. Like you go to a table, right, to remember the first part, and then you go to the lampshade, and then and you have these different things in mind. Yeah. You have these different things in mind to trigger certain texts. Yeah. Are you aware of that technique, or have you worked with dyslexic actors that? Before I came to university, I did about 2 years where I was a learning support assistant and a teacher for children that students at college, and a lot of them had dyslexia, and that kind of thing is very helpful, and you know, visual memory, you know, with kind of whatever sort of remembering words, or you know, that you're going to speak or have to write or whatever, it can be really helpful. And I think it, you know, it's great for stuff like speeches, especially. Like that's fantastic, you know, to have like almost like a kind of visual storyboard of what you're going to say. Do you know what I mean? But I think in terms of acting, I think because some actors do really struggle with line learning, it is a big struggle, and a lot of them in their own time will have visual cues that they know work. But I think in terms of being like blocking it inside a scene, it can make things kind of become stale, like I've said, really, you know, just because it means that you always know you're going to go and sit on that bench, you know, for that line, and then you're not really living, you're just repeating. Do you know what I mean? Right. And it is about living. You know, like Meisner says it's about living truthfully in imaginary circumstances. That's what he says acting is, sort of thing. We could move quite interesting, quite smoothly on to Meisner then. Yeah, sure. So what came out about what I read about him is that he was an actor first as well, wasn't he? Ostmeyer, yeah. He did train as an actor as well, So with his introduction to German theatre, I can't remember when I saw it, but he said that German theatre had too much decoration and aesthetic.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And that he in his direction he rebelled against that and created his own aesthetic called capitalist realism.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
So can you talk a bit about that and how that's influenced you?
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, yeah, Thomas Ostermeyer was, he trained as an actor and then he trained as a director, and he did very well, like, for himself, very early. And his shows are, I mean, personally, I think they are phenomenal. They're quite amazing to watch. Yeah, quite a lot. Yeah, quite a few. And I think what he was very much in the same way, really, as Meisner and Alfred's to some extent. He was very much about the actors and especially about relationships on stage, and that things shouldn't be necessarily like embellished with set and props and costume, and it should be much more about what's happening in the moment, in the scene, between people. And a lot of what he's directed, especially in the last sort of 10 years or so, has been versions of older classics sort of thing.
Yeah.
So he's done like Hedda Gabler and Doll's House and stuff like that, and he's done his own version, sort of changed things around and modernised them to some extent, but without it being sort of forced. Do you know what I mean? Just sort of bringing it to a human basis of like, this is what it is. This could be your life, but it's someone else's, and sort of watching it, almost as a kind of drama, really. And quite a cinematic drama as well. He's quite big on cinematic techniques, sort of bringing people together, bringing the sort of personal larger,
Okay, so cinematic techniques.
Yeah,
that's interesting that you say that, because obviously I'm not familiar with his work.
Yeah, sure, no.
But when you say that, it seems to contradict what I read that his work rails against the capitalist kind of the German theatre that was decorative and celebrity heavy.
Yeah.
And he railed against that. So how did he make it kind of theatrical whilst criticising the convention? Yeah,
sure. I mean, not necessarily everyone would agree about the sort of cinematic techniques, but I think like he's very big on making sure that it's engaging, and one of his big things is that he wants young people to be engaged in his theatre, and he did pull in a lot of young people into his audiences that weren't there before, and I think he did that through sort of cinematic techniques in terms of like keeping things at a faster pace and keeping things moving. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it wasn't like let's put on an old classic and have it classically, like let's do it in a way that is relatable for people, and I think he did rebel a lot against the kind of like big expensive theatre at first, although I'd say, I don't know, like a lot of his work that he brings over here is quite expensive to see, which is sort of a bit contradictory of what he set out to do now, you could argue. And I was lucky enough to do a workshop with him actually, like a few months back, and he's a very interesting man. I think he's very sort of like strict in what he thinks is good and not good, and I think working with him, possibly it's not as free and open as he might like you to think it is. I think someone like Mike Alfreds is very big on letting the actors be them, and I'd say Ostermeyer's much bigger on this is my vision and we'll mould it to that,
right,
to some extent. But he is a phenomenal director, and he is like one of the leading ones in the world right now, and probably the leading European director right now. So he's interesting. His work is really interesting. If you get to see any, I definitely recommend seeing it. Him and Ivor Van Hove, they're both really incredible directors. Yeah.
So you talked about sort of obviously Shakespeare, but also you mentioned A Doll's House.
Yeah.
So that reminds me of my introduction to Hamlet.
Right.
And with that introduction to Hamlet, the particular teacher that showed us that, the assignment was compared between Hamlet and A Doll's House.
Okay.
But to give an extra comparison, that wasn't part of the assignment, but he brought in Pinter as a caretaker.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Which I found absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
That particularly with Pinter, that you could say so much with so little.
Yeah.
Well, it's a contradiction in terms, isn't it? There's not so little because of the way he uses kind of the interactions and I mean, I don't know how he produced his plays himself, but there was obviously that thing about it's not necessarily the text that's completely important, but the interactions between the characters and between the actors.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming you've read those three and possibly done productions of.
Well, I mean, I've read a lot of Pinter and Ibsen, and I mean, I think I agree. I mean, Ibsen is still like, you know, an incredible playwright, you know, even today, and his work. I think there's something very special about Ibsen's writing because it's still very relatable, even though it is, you know, they are classics, really.
Absolutely.
If you like. Much more relatable than Shakespeare, I personally think. And I'm not a massive Shakespeare fan, if I'm honest. Like, I think there's some plays that are really good, but generally it's very sort of glammed up and wordsy for no reason, I think, a lot of the time. And obviously it was a thing of the time, and that's what it was. But, you know, if we're looking at what to put on now,
I think think the thing about Shakespeare for me is that once you have to work at it to get it, but once you work at it, you will get it. It's true. It does capture the human spirit.
It does.
But
it does.
as you say, it's so word heavy and so kind of dense. And thick with so many different things. You have to work really hard to get it.
Yeah. I think you're right. Yeah.
But with A Doll's House, I think it's something that's relatable across time, really.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I agree.
With very little change in the text, you could literally set it in any time.
Yeah. I think you're right.
There was a radio version of it. There was an Indian cast.
Oh, okay.
And I can't remember who were the actors, but it was absolutely brilliant.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Oh, that sounds good. Yeah.
So again, with very little change in the text, it was.
Yeah.
It was brilliant.
Yeah.
And it was set in the caste system and stuff like that.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So can you say anything about that kind of comparison between Shakespeare, Ibsen, and Pinter?
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, I know why the teacher did it, but
yeah.
Do you think that's something that's important? Does it make sense to you, that comparison?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. I think it's an interesting comparison, and I suppose, you know, it takes things over a period of time as well, you know, at different points, and you know, that's interesting. I think there are a lot of similarities. I think I would say Ibsen and Pinter do concentrate on character a lot. I wouldn't necessarily agree that Shakespeare does. I think Shakespeare concentrates on the narrative as the key thing, and I think
that makes sense,
I'd say that, you know, I think he does concentrate on character a lot more than, you know, contemporaries of his, but I can totally understand and see why the teacher would make those relations. I think they're interesting. I think they're right, and I mean, with Pinter, for example, I think sometimes it's much more about the kind of overall impact of the play than it is about any individual characters, sort of thing. But I think through all of them, there is this concentration on human, sort of the humanity in it all, you know. And that's why I love Othello, because I think that it's one of the Shakespeares that is very, very good at concentrating on the humanity and the sort of morality of it. You know, and that's a key thing for both Pinter and Ibsen in all their work, I'd say. There's a great play by Ibsen called The Room, which is a short play, and it ends with like a very violent, horrific act sort of thing.
Oh, okay.
But throughout, it's all about this relationship between a couple, and then at the end, there's this terrible act that they commit.
Yeah.
But like, it's just really good. It's very confined, and all Pinter's shows plays are very confined.
Yeah.
And I'd say Ibsen's really are as well. And in some ways you could argue Shakespeare's is, in terms of that it's not really like none of his plays necessarily, unless they're the histories if you like, are based in this world. I think you could argue. I think you could sort of see them all as otherworldly. And other realities almost, which is something that he was very ahead of his time to do, and I think that's why his plays exist so much as well, Even Othello, yes, it's about soldiers and war and everyday things, but there's something about it that's not quite real, do you know what I mean? It's slightly otherworldly.
Well, I found it interesting when I didn't know much about it before, other than there was the concentration on the black actor for the Othello.
Yeah.
But what I found interesting when I saw your production was that even though there was that emphasis on kind of pointing the finger at the Black Moor, in reality it was just a case of kind of intrigue and ambition and betrayal. So it kind of exposed the lie straight away. I mean, I think that's the brilliance of Shakespeare, that you kind of know what's going to happen within the first few lines, but it still grips you.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah.
So how do you, going with that, with such a kind of clear idea of what's going to happen throughout Shakespeare's play, how do you work that and still make it gripping and interesting? And I suppose that goes back to those techniques that we talked about in terms of your influences. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think it's a really interesting point. I think you're totally right that they do. They do that. There's always a setup at the beginning of most of his plays where it does sort of say, oh well, this is what's going to happen. Expect this, and then it does. And there's not much. There's not many sort of twists or anything. And, I mean, I think with Othello, actually, in some ways there are, in terms of how many people die and how much it happens. Like, you don't necessarily expect that, and people die out of the blue a little bit. But like, I think it's about playing into that, because most people that come and see a Shakespeare, the key plays, the big well-known plays, they know what's going to happen, and even for the people that don't, they've definitely heard things. It's like everyone knows the ending of The Sixth Sense. It's that kind of thing, so it's sort of, you kind of have to play into it to some extent, but I think it's not. You should never, it's like anything. It's like acting. You should never play something with the end in mind, because for these characters, they don't know. Like Othello and Iago and Desdemona have no idea at the start how it's going to go. And me and Fergus MacDonald, who was playing Iago, we spent a lot of time together talking about Iago's plan and how we talked about it, and we also got it up on its feet mostly. That was what we did most of the time, and did work on it in terms of when does he know things that he's going to do, and how confident is he in the plan, because I think a lot of it is you could say, oh well, he knows from the start how it's going to pan out, but of course he doesn't, because he's not otherworldly, he's not psychic or something, he's just doing these plans and seeing what happens. And I think for Ferg that changed his performance a lot, because he was sort of I have no idea if this is going to work, but this is what I'm doing, and then suddenly everything might change in one scene, and he's got to do something else, So I think you can't play with the end in mind, because everyone needs to play it real, and sort of be Desdemona and Othello need to be totally in love, because they are, and then it slowly degrades out of love, and it's the same with all plays, really, because I think it's easy, and especially if you look at something like farce or comedy in general, you could play it, knowing things. You could play it with a thing that how things are going to work out, and then I think it takes away something for the audience if you do that. It sort of makes it detaches them.
How long can you stay? Because I know it's
probably
close.
About 10 minutes, man.
10 minutes.
Yeah. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's cool.
So I'd say so.
Let me try and think of where to go next. So with 10 minutes in mind. So I'd like to speak about the actors that you choose for the roles, and how you work with them in terms of their personality, in terms of their physical presence, and in terms of the text.
Yeah.
So I don't know how many actors you had kind of to choose from.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a bit about that and sort of where you went with it?
Yeah, well, the Canterbury Shakespeare Festival, they do auditions every year for the shows, so it's not a kind of approach people basis. It is an audition thing, and we had a decent amount turn up for the auditions. I think we had about 45 people audition originally, right. I think, and I shortened the cast because I really wanted an intimate cast, so we only had a cast of 11, and a few people doubled up roles, sort of things, because they had smaller roles, and I wanted everyone to have a decent part in it. So I had a pretty good choice of people. I saw a lot of people that were very very good, and obviously there were some characters that I was like, I really want this person to play them, and we were lucky enough to get. Are you able to say who they are? I think generally people know, and I think they expect that the people that were cast in the big leading parts in Othello were people that that I knew I wanted. Yeah, and one of the things with Fergus MacDonald, for example, was that he kind of had this element in the audition which was slightly comic, and slightly sort of stand-uppy. Which I think worked well. There was that part when kind of he's talking to, I forget, is it Diego or the blonde-haired guy? Oh, Cassio. Yeah.
So he walked off stage, and then he started doing his soliloquy. Yeah, and saying about his plans, and then he came back.
Rodrigo. Yeah. Jim,
I thought that was
Jim
brilliant.
Brown. Yeah. We added that in, and that was something I wanted to add in because I think it's nice to drop in a bit of modern sort of joking around and sort of playing with the text that everyone knows that Shakespeare writes in these ridiculous soliloquies when people are still around. That reveal loads of personal information. So it was nice to have a joke of sort of that he overhears it. The other character, but I think a kind of joking side to things was good, and I think Iago, he enjoys doing what he does to Othello, so it's kind of important that we see that. And I think Emilia Duke, obviously the role of Othello demands a certain thing of an actor in terms of that unless you want to change it a lot, you do need a black actor to play them more. And Emilia is an incredibly talented actor, and he wants to. I think he wants brilliant. To go into acting, and and he is a brilliant actor. And about
Emilio in particular, you would have seen it in the review. He had this habit of all the way through the performance, he would punctuate certain things with a clap.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
What was going on there? Was it just something he did? Was it unintentional? Or
I think
I was trying to figure out as I wrote in the review. I didn't know whether it was nervousness, deliberate, accidental.
Emilia is someone that he learns the lines straight away, so that he really knows them. And he's someone that works on character to no end, sort of thing, in his own time as well. So it was very much something deliberate for him that he wanted to add in. And
that was deliberate.
Yeah, it was very much something that he worked on.
It was brilliant.
And he added,
it was perfect.
Yeah. And I think I think an important thing is to let people kind of explore what they want with the characters, and sort of if they might have to, you're there as a guide director, not as a kind of this is what it should be, I think. And and what he was doing with character, and Ferguson and everyone in the cast, and honestly everybody was forming their own characters and their own world, and it showed, I think, and everyone did an amazing job at that. And
I was disappointed in myself that I wasn't able to give a full review for each one of the performances, because they were all brilliant.
Yeah, no, you can't though.
But in terms of I've got a bad short-term memory. There was only certain things I could focus on.
Sure.
And also, with other things going on, I had to just get it out, really.
Right. Yeah.
But,
sure.
Yeah, every one of the performances was brilliant.
Oh, well, no, thanks. They're fantastic. They're really, really good at it. Yeah.
So to wrap up. let's just talk a bit about where you see your future in terms of acting and directing.
Okay.
Or do you?
Yeah.
Are you living in the moment?
No. Yeah, no. Well, I mean, at the moment, I'm not totally sure. As I think a lot of people are at points, about what I want to do, whether it's acting or directing. And I'm taking a year now where I'm going to do both in my own time and see what happens, because I used to love acting a lot, and directing is the thing I'm most passionate about right now. And I this year I'm going to be directing a short show that's going to hopefully tour around with a girl called Ellie Stone, who's a fantastic actress who lives locally, and it's like a one-woman monologue played by Lee Hall, called Spoonface Steinberg, and it's about a kid that has autism, and she's dying of cancer. She's sort of recounting her life, really.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
Just for a second.
No, it's fine. She's like recounting her life story so far, as a 7-year-old sort of thing. And it's very touching, but it's also very funny, and so we're going to do that together, and then I'd sort of try and act a bit and do some various other little projects and stuff. But I think it's something that I haven't decided on, and I don't think there's a need to particularly. I would want to go into one of them professionally. I don't think I would do it through study anymore, because I don't think that the system, the educational system in this country, is good for theatre, really, personally.
Really?
Yeah, or acting. I very much believe that. I think some of the drama schools do a good job, but I think that generally it's weak and it's not real world learning.
Okay.
And my experience at the university was not that the course was good at all. It was that the society was great, for everyone, drama-wise.
Oh, okay.
But yeah. So I just have to see where things go. But yeah, who knows?
That's cool.
Yeah.
So, I mean, is there anywhere where the listeners can contact you? Or do you?
Okay.
Would you like?
Yeah. I don't mind if anyone wanted to talk about anything. I'd be more than happy to. I mean, I'm on Facebook as under my name, Tom Holton. My email, if you want, if people were interested, is Tom Mark Holton, HOULTON @googlemail.com. But yeah, I mean, I think like a lot of us at this age, I'm very young and starting out, and I've been lucky enough to have a lot of experience here at university and outside, but I'm very much learning. But I think you always are, and that's what it is, and that's what makes it so exciting. So yeah.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you, man.
Many thanks to Tom Holton for agreeing to do that interview. The reason why I love that so much is because theatre directing and plays in general are not necessarily something I would go to as a point of interest. I've gone to a few plays in the past, especially starting my higher education, but I've never thought of engaging with the ideas of directors. So thank you very much to Tom Holton. Just to say, the next episode is with a homeless artist called James Snedden. There's several things we talked about, including his art, but also his alcoholism, his homelessness, and his difficulties. So I'm really excited about that. I loved doing that impromptu interview. There will also be a link to a documentary that a Kent student did with James. It's a mini documentary she did herself, and where she speaks with James about the same thing, really, but mostly his homelessness. So thank you very much, guys. See you next week. Bye.